Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar, where we are going to go over the ConsoliDator Plus, and we're going to focus on the main messaging here, which is the ConsoliDator Plus has PLC capabilities, HMI visibility, and the big one here, the one that everyone should appreciate, is no programmer needed. That's right. You do not have to hire an outside programmer. You don't even need to know how to program or any type of computer language to configure this device. So we're going to take a look at some examples of how that has been used in the field, and we're going to go over a few of the cool features that the ConsoliDator Plus has. But before I ramble on too much, I want to hear from you. So I'm just curious. I want to know how familiar you are with the ConsoliDator Plus. And if you're not familiar at all, that's totally fine. That's sort of half the point of doing these webinars. I myself am very familiar with the ConsoliDator Plus, as I would hope you would know. All righty, let's see what kind of results that we got from here. Well, a majority of you folks are vaguely familiar with the ConsoliDator Plus, which is really encouraging to know. It means that you've at least seen it, you've heard about it, maybe you've even pushed a few buttons on it, so that's really great. And for those of you who are not familiar at all, that's perfectly okay too. Again, that's half the point of doing these types of webinars. Now, the thing I do want to say is that this is not going to go too in-depth. It's not going to be feature-rich. We're not going to go into too much detail about the inputs and the outputs and all that. For that, I have plenty of other resources. We could always do more webinars in the future. But without any further ado, let's take a look at what we're actually going to cover here. So today, we are going to learn about the ConsoliDator Plus and the functionality it has that makes it the perfect user-friendly alternative to a PLC. And user-friendly being the key word here. We're also going to take a look at how the ConsoliDator Plus has actually helped a real customer in real life solve a major problem while avoiding the cost and hassle of installing and programming a brand new PLC. We're also going to take a look at some of the new add-on features that help expand the capabilities of the ConsoliDator Plus to new extents. And then finally, we're going to gain some insights on exactly how the ConsoliDator Plus is able to satisfy a multitude of these application types that PLCs would traditionally be used in. So hopefully that sounds fun to you, so let's buckle up and get ready. The first thing we're going to take a look at is just a reminder that the biggest advantage to the ConsoliDator Plus is the fact that you never need to hire a programmer again. Now, the reason why is because the ConsoliDator Plus comes with its own software that's free. It requires zero coding experience. It requires zero ladder logic experience. So quite literally, anybody can program the ConsoliDator Plus, or I like to use the word configure the ConsoliDator Plus. So, but it still comes with an abundance of powerful features. Let's not get confused here. Even though you're not using code or ladder logic to configure the device, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's still a powerful machine that's extremely capable. Again, it has a user-friendly interface. Literally anybody can go in here and figure out how to configure this. And just to give you a rough idea of what we're talking about here, why the never hire a programmer again is such a big deal to folks, is because not only does the PLC cost money, as I'm sure you know, but you have to buy the software most of the time. And then unless you know how to program it yourself, you have to hire somebody to do it. And so based on some internet research I have done on PLC forums, based on feedback I have received personally from folks out in the field, the general cost, or at least the range of the cost for a PLC to be installed, programmed, and ready to go is between $5,000 and $15,000. So, you may see online that a PLC might, some of the lower cost ones might be only $500, and that's all great and good, but that doesn't include the software, the programming time, and all that. So again, just to recap, we could install a ConsoliDator Plus, have it configured and running and operational for well under $5,000. And $5,000 would probably be around the maximum you'd ever have to pay for ConsoliDator Plus. And we compare that to between $5,000 and $15,000. So that's why it's a huge advantage. The other portion of it is, unlike PLCs, the ConsoliDator Plus actually comes with a built-in display. It comes with, an HMI interface, so you don't have to buy a third-party device. You don't have to program a separate device, and don't have to buy a separate piece of software. The ConsoliDator Plus programs with one piece of software that is free. There are no licensing fees, and you can have as many copies on your computer as you want. So that is why it's such a big deal to say you never have to hire a programmer again. But what exactly can it do, right? I'm saying all these great things, but what can this device do? Well, it can do a whole lot of things. These are the key features that really make the ConsoliDator Plus unique and comparable to a PLC. So first and foremost, it has a real-time clock. So it is able to schedule certain events based on a specific day and time. So let's just say, for a very small example, you have a customer who wants to turn on a pump and let it run for 45 minutes every weekend for a half hour. What I can do is I can configure the ConsoliDator Plus, or you could configure the ConsoliDator Plus to, on those specific days at that specific time, turn on a pump for a specific amount of time. That's just a very small example, but again, you can schedule events for specific days and times. Talking about times, we also have the ability to create timers. Now, what I mean by this is we're timing something, like a start and stop time, stopwatch type deal. But these timers can be used for all sorts of different things. If you wanted to see how long it takes to fill a tank, we could do something like that, where an operator presses a button when they're starting, presses it again when they're done, and it keeps track of how much time has elapsed. That's one way we could do it. Or let's say we actually want a timer to start when an alarm goes off. So the example I usually give for this is we have a tank with a high-level alarm, and for whatever reason, when the alarm first goes off, the operator may ignore it. They might be busy doing something else, and they plan on getting back to it 5 minutes later. But of course they forget. And so now this high-level alarm has been on for 5 minutes, and it might even be leaking all over the place. Well, what I can do is I can set up a timer so that when that high alarm is triggered, a timer will start counting. And when it hits a certain threshold, like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, however long you want, it then throws off an additional alarm that says, hey guys, I've been over here with a high alarm status for 5 minutes now. Someone needs to take care of it. So that's one small example of what we can do with the timers on this device. The one really, really impressive feature we have is the use of Boolean operators to form more complicated type of control sequences. So, for example, let's say you have a couple tanks out in a tank farm, and you have this one alarm beacon, and you want to know if any of your tanks go into high alarm. You don't care which one. You want to know if any of them go to high alarm, turn that light on. Well, what I can do is I would set up a high alarm for each individual tank, and then I would create a combination of those. I would take all of those alarms and create what I call an OR alarm. And that OR alarm will trigger the light. So no matter which tank it is, if any of them go into high alarm, I can throw that alarm. So that's the very basic example, but we can do and OR alarms, or NAND and NOR alarms. If you're familiar at all with gate logic or programming PLCs, this will be extremely familiar to you. If not, just know that there is a certain level of logic that we can program with a ConsoliDator Plus. We also have built-in math functions, and I'm not going to dwell on this for too long here, but the built-in math functions are pretty powerful because it's not just basic arithmetic, although we can do basic arithmetic. It can do square roots. It can do ratios. It can do, excuse me, it can do all sorts of different trig functions. Pretty much anything you can do in a scientific calculator, the ConsoliDator Plus can do it. And the good thing about it is that you can actually have the output from one math channel be the input to another. So you can actually build formulas with this device if you wanted to. This next one here is actually my very favorite feature on the ConsoliDator Plus. And it takes a little bit to explain it. So what this feature, or what this function will allow you to do is, the example I give is, let's say you have a lift station here, and you typically monitor the level and control the level with a submersible pressure transducer. That's your primary sensor. So when that's running and everything's cool, that's what we're getting our level readings from. However, you also have a backup level measurement device, and let's say it's a radar sensor that's hanging from above. So under normal operating conditions, the primary sensor is the one that's feeding the ConsoliDator Plus the level information so that it can do the controlling. But let's say a wire gets cut, or for whatever reason that primary sensor goes down. Well, I can program the ConsoliDator Plus so that it automatically switches over to that backup sensor. And then when the primary sensor comes back online, it will automatically switch back to your primary sensor. And so basically what that means is no matter what happens, you can still have complete level control, and you don't have to worry about physically switching anything or moving wires. So it's a really, really powerful function that has actually been used in lift stations quite a bit. And then lastly, one of the unique features that makes it similar to a PLC is the fact that it does have an Ethernet output. It supports Modbus TCP IP, so you can integrate this ConsoliDator Plus into a traditional SCADA system. And so that's where it all ties together there. So again, that's just the basics of what it can do and the things that it can do that make it comparable to a PLC. Now, with that, let's actually take a look at how a ConsoliDator Plus has been used in real life on a real customer to solve a pretty major problem that they were having while avoiding the $5,000 to $15,000 cost of installing a brand new PLC. So I'm going to go through the backstory a little bit. So this was a wastewater customer, and they were monitoring and controlling the level of a body of water. And they were controlling these with hose pumps. Now, the hose pumps were just controlled with an on-off relay, okay? So when the pumps were called on to drain out, they would run at 100% capacity all the time. Now, what would happen is if there was a hole in one of these hose pumps or one of the hoses of the hose pumps, what would happen is the current would spike phenomenally high. And in this case, it would go up to 115 amps. And so what that did was it would turn the pump off and it would let the operator know, hey, we have a leak. We need to fix this hose so we don't damage the pumps and whatnot. So what the customer ended up doing was they wanted to put VFDs on their pumps. And they wanted to do that so that they don't have to constantly run them at 100% capacity, okay? Now, when they installed the VFD did allow them to have one shut-off point in amps. So it was basically, the VFD was saying, okay, if this pump current draw gets to 115 amps, I'm going to shut it off. And that was fine. That worked out great. But there was a problem. The reason why they used the VFDs was so they didn't have to run the pumps at 100%, right? But this 115 amp mark is based on the fact that the pumps would be running at 100% capacity. So the customer was not going to be able to trip an alarm or shut off the pump if there was a leak. Because if the pump was running at, let's say, 20% capacity, well, it's never, ever going to hit that 115 amp mark, and it will never turn off. So that means the customer could be running their pumps with major leaks and have no idea. So what they did was they told the VFD manufacturer the problem that they're facing, and they actually suggested, hey, you should get a PLC. That's really the best way to control this type of thing. They even gave the customer model number and manufacturer to look at, right? Well, again, the VFDs were a brand new installation for them, and so the thought of spending another $5,000 to $15,000 on the PLC just didn't sit too well. But luckily for them, there was a Precision Digital distributor that was working with them and said, hey, wait a minute, the ConsoliDator Plus can do this. You don't need a PLC. And so this is what I did. They called me up, and I configured the device for this particular application. And so what I basically did was I configured the ConsoliDator Plus to maintain the level. So when the level got to a certain point, we would turn a relay on. It would turn the pumps on. It would drain out until the acceptable level, and then it would turn it off. Nothing too fancy about that. But we wanted to make sure we were monitoring the current draw. So what I did was the customer put a current transducer so that we could read the current as a 4 to 20 milliamp signal. We brought that 4 to 20 signal into the ConsoliDator Plus, and what I did was I had the ConsoliDator Plus monitoring the rate of change. So basically what it was doing is it was looking at that 4 to 20 signal and saying, okay, how much did this signal fluctuate over a given period of time? So it's looking for a rate of change in that signal. And what I did was I set up an alarm so that if the rate of change when the pump is on, if the rate of change was 30 amps per second or more, the ConsoliDator Plus would shut the pump down. So now, whether they have a huge pump or a small pump, or whether they have, a pump with a bunch of holes in it and it's running at 20% or 100%, they're always going to be able to know that, hey, we had some sort of issue here with the current draw. Now, the last part of this particular application is the way I had it originally programmed was that when the alarm condition was cleared, it would start the pump up again automatically. Customer didn't really want that, so I changed it, and we made it so that an operator had to physically come over and acknowledge the alarm and fix the problem before the pump would come back on. And so that is just one small example of how the ConsoliDator Plus was able to save an end user a ton of money in a fraction of the time, and they didn't have to use a PLC, buy an HMI, hire someone to program it. I programmed it for them for free. So, and we have plenty of other examples of this as well, but this is just the one that I wanted to share with you folks today. Now, with that said, I've talked a whole lot, so now I want to hear from you. Are you currently working on an application where a PLC might be too costly, or maybe it's overkill for what you're trying to do? And don't worry, if you answer yes, I will reach out and see if we can help you out with that. And if you answer no, that's totally fine too. So I still have a few answers coming in, so I'm going to hold off on skipping to the results for right now. All righty, let's see what we got here. All right, great. That's actually what I was expecting. I was actually expecting about that mix, because obviously it's not going to be every single day somebody has an application for the ConsoliDator Plus to be used. So that's really great. All righty, so let's move on to another topic here, the advanced math and logic that I mentioned earlier. So as I mentioned, this device does have math functions. You can take the value of two channels and add them together, or subtract them, or multiply, divide, whatever it is that you want. We can do basic arithmetic. We can also do average readings and weighted average. So basically what that means is we have an average where, let's say you have 5 tanks and you want to know what the average level is, we could do that. But we also have weighted average. And so this was a really, really interesting one, and it came up in a real-life application a couple weeks ago where somebody had 2 level sensors. They had one of them where they trusted it, quote-unquote trusted it, a lot more than their other level sensor, but they needed to use both of them to get the same level reading. So basically what we did was I set it up so that both of the inputs to the ConsoliDator Plus were feeding a level reading. However, instead of having it both just be averaged, what I did was I made it so that the level sensor that the customer trusted most was adding 80% of the average was coming from the trusted level sensor, and only 20% was coming from the not so trusted level sensor. And so that's just a very small example of how weighted average could be used. We also have these things here called absolute value and absolute difference. So for anyone who doesn't know, all of that means is that any value is always going to be a positive number. So if you were to subtract 10 gallons from 5 gallons, in real life you'd have negative 5 gallons. But if we put absolute difference, well, you'd have 5 gallons. It's just always going to take whatever the negative value is, make it positive. And lastly, and this is actually really, really cool, and people really like this one, has built-in open channel flow formulas. So you choose your flume or your weir, and it will populate the formula that comes out of the ISCO book automatically, and you just sort of go in there and fill in the blanks. So it's actually really, really cool because it shows you the formula. You can manipulate the formula. It's really nice. And, of course, I have to mention this again, Boolean operators, because this is an extremely powerful feature. I have this one feature, actually, is how we even got into trying to compare this to a PLC. I had a customer that asked one time, could it do X, Y, and Z? And it required really some significant logic work. And I messed around with some of the alarms and figured out how to use them. And I was able to configure the ConsoliDator Plus for an application that the customer was convinced only a PLC could do. And it was the Boolean operators that made that possible. So it's a really, really powerful feature. Now, another reason why this is such an attractive offering or substitute for PLC is because, as I mentioned a few times already, the software is completely free. That's 100% free. And not only that, it's free. Not only is it free to download, but there's no hidden cost or licensing fees. We're not going to, if you have to come back to us and upgrade something on your unit or add a couple channels and you need some tech support help, we're never going to charge you a penny for, your software is a little out of date. You have to update your software. That's never going to be a thing here. So it's going to always be free to program, always going to be free to download. But you can have it set up for you. We do have low-cost factory setups. So for less than $300, that's literally for less than $300, Precision Digital will configure one of these units to an end user's exact specifications. And so no matter what it is that you're looking to do, we will program it for you. So again, just to make the comparison once more, rather than paying $5,000 to $15,000 for a PLC and the software and the programming and all that, you can spend maybe $2,000 on a consolidator and less than $300 on the actual configuration. So a lot of cost savings here, Now, Precision Digital is known as a panel meter manufacturer, of course, and so we can't really forget about those, right? And we talked a lot about how the ConsoliDator Plus makes for a great replacement or alternative to a PLC. Well, it also does one other thing. It can help one of your customers consolidate one of their control panels. Get it? The ConsoliDator can help consolidate control panels. What I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you have a customer and they have an entire bank of panel meters that are only displaying 4 to 20 signals. Well, if that's the case, you could take all of those panel meters, all 28 of them, and bring them all into one device so that you have one small device that's doing all of that displaying for you instead of 20 panel meters. Or let's say a customer of yours has panel meters that are used for alarming or control as well as display. Well, we could take a handful of those and, again, into one device. So even if you have customers out there, or even if you have a panel full of panel meters in your plant, the ConsoliDator Plus can be used to consolidate your space and bring all your wiring and everything into one spot. Now, while I'm on this page, I would like to point out one fact here. On the right-hand side of the screen, next to the picture of the consolidator, we have all of these different application types. Now, the reason why that's important is because if you are at all familiar with our legacy products, you will know that certain model numbers can do certain jobs. So if you needed a flow totalizer, you'd have to get a model number that did totalization. If you needed pulse inputs on that totalizer, you'd have to go with a different model number. With the ConsoliDator Plus, that is not the case, okay? The ConsoliDator Plus can handle literally anything. And it doesn't matter what the application is as long as we have a common process signal, such as a 4 to 20 or a pulse or Modbus or even discrete signal. So you'll notice here that we have, pH monitoring, flow measurement, temperature, level, gas detection. All of these application types, these can all be done on the same device, and they can all be done simultaneously if you wanted to. So you don't have to use a consolidator for just level or for just flow. You could use it for both if you wanted to. You can totally mix and match it. Now, how exactly does the ConsoliDator Plus do all of this stuff? How is it going to be, a good alternative for a PLC? Well, the reason why is because of the I/O nature. The modular nature of the I/O. So basically, rather than saying, hey, this consolidator has 4 inputs and 10 relay outputs, no, the consolidator is built by the I/O. So basically, we have 7 slots in the back of the ConsoliDator Plus, and each slot accepts an input or an output card. And so let's say, for example, you only care about 4 to 20 signals and you're only looking to display. Well, we could have up to 28 4 to 20 signals. Or we could have up to 28 pulse inputs. But again, it's modular. There isn't, people have asked me before, what is the fixed number of I/O? There is not an answer to that question because it's completely dependent on what the customer needs. And if that's confusing at all, please feel free to reach out after. I'd be more than happy to go over that. Now, I mentioned 28 4 to 20 inputs, which is impressive in and of itself. However, each and every single 4 to 20 input is electrically isolated from one another, and they each contain a 24-volt power supply to power the loop, which is really, really nice. That's 28 power supplies. A lot. Again, we can configure timers, schedules, and we can do all sorts of different things based on days and times. Really powerful feature. I've actually used the scheduling feature for resetting totals. Somebody wants to make sure their totals are reset and captured every day at midnight. And so I was able to configure ConsoliDator Plus for that particular application. Again, we have math functions. Don't want to forget about that. We have math functions. Again, the output from one math function can be the input to another math function, which is really nice. We also have a numeric bar graph and display, which is built in. And not just numbers and bar graphs, but we also have the ability to do custom messages, which is really, really cool. Really cool. You can do like full word messages. So that's just a brief example of how the ConsoliDator Plus can do all of this stuff and why we can tout that it's a good alternative to a traditional PLC. Now, here's our last slide, folks. This is about our new add-on features. So this is a really, really interesting way to to upgrade your product. So what we have here is instead of having to buy a new product, like let's say, for example, you bought a ConsoliDator Plus 2 months ago, you didn't get the data logger, but now you need it. Well, you don't have to buy a new product to add it. All you have to do is buy the add-on code, and we send you a code, and it unlocks the features. So it's really, really interesting how that works. But the 2 add-on features that we currently have, there will be more coming in the future, is USB data logging. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. We do have webinars that are based on the data logging, but for the sake of this session, you can think of the data logger as we can log up to, we can log up to 12 different parameters on each log, and we can have up to 8 logs. And what's really nice about it is we can customize how and when the ConsoliDator Plus starts a data log. So, for example, let's say you want to start a data log every Monday at 8 a.m. It just logs for a couple hours and stops. We could do that. Let's say you only want to log your flow and level readings, but only when you have a high alarm on your tank. I can do that. We can make it so that when that alarm is triggered, it starts a data log for however long you want, and then it stops. So it's extremely flexible and extremely customizable when it comes to the trigger events and what you can and cannot do with it. And then lastly, we also have a complete suite of Modbus settings. So we have client, server, snooper, and spoofer mode. So our legacy products could only support up to 16 Modbus registers. and this one can do up to 199. Our legacy products could also only operate in one mode at a time. With the Consolidator Plus, we can actually be used in every single mode simultaneously, while again scanning up to 199 Modbus registers. So if you have questions on Modbus or data logging, please feel free to let me know. But it has been exactly 30 minutes, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, folks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the questions that have come in during the presentation. You can feel free to stick around and hear me answer them, or you can ask more, so please do. If you have any questions, please let me know. Questions, comments, or compliments. I'm always open to compliments as well. So if you have any of those, feel free to chat them in now, and I'm going to start going through some of the questions. Let's see. So somebody asked for the averaging, and one of the inputs goes to fault, or the difference is too much. Let's see. Sorry, I need my glasses. Or there's too large of a difference from the rest. Can the average be programmed to ignore the fault input from the averaging? Yes. I would have to sit down and figure out exactly how to do it. But just based on other applications I've configured, yes, I can have the Consolidator Plus ignore all sorts of different things for all sorts of different reasons. Like, for example, I can tell the Consolidator Plus what I consider a signal break. So usually that would be 4 milliamps, right? But let's say, for example, in this application, you want the break to be, under 6 milliamps. Well, then I can have the Consolidator Plus report a break, and we can do all sorts of alarmings and scheduled events based on that. So if you want more details, be happy to get on the phone with you and discuss this particular application, but I can confidently say, yes, we can do that. So let's see. For replacing multiple display meters, customers are often concerned about one display failure losing all signals. Is Consolidator Plus like a PLC where failures usually per I/O card slot basis like PLC? Yes. So that's a really, really great question and a great point. So I mentioned the fact that, I'll just go back to the slide real quick. I mentioned the fact that if you wanted to, you could actually replace a bunch of these display meters here with one Consolidator Plus. Now, this person is absolutely correct. One of the main concerns is, well, if I bring all of those signals into one device, what happens if that one device goes out? Do I lose everything? And the answer is no. So basically, just like on a PLC, every single input, every single 4 to 20 milliamp input to the Consolidator Plus is electrically isolated. So if one of them goes dead, that's not necessarily indicative that the other ones went dead. But let's assume that they did. Okay, let's assume that an entire card got fried. Well, that's not going to spread anywhere else. So yes, it would affect the card. It would not wipe out the entire, all of the different loops. And because they're isolated, it should only happen on one input unless there was a catastrophic failure somewhere in the plant. That's a really great question. Thank you for asking. Someone asked, does it overheat when all 24-volt loop supplies are operational? That's a really great question, and the answer is, well, it depends. So you caught me on a technicality there, Ash. So even though each and every single 4 to 20 input has a 24-volt supply, you can have up to 28. There is a slight caveat. We cannot exceed 1.6 amps. Or 1,600 milliamps. So the answer to your question, Ash, is no, because we won't allow it to, but I see where you're getting at. So typically, you're not going to use all 28 inputs with all 28 power supplies. Folks, I've not seen that happen yet. Not that it can't be done, but I use that as just an example, just a wow factor, basically. Let's see. Someone else has a telemetry gateway that receives about 20-plus flow signals using Modbus. Can the Consolidator Plus show on the screen the values of flow pressure? Yes, it absolutely can. So whether you're going to use RS-45 or Ethernet, the Consolidator Plus can be written to. So you can absolutely write, you have 20 plus flow signals. We can have up to, we can do up to 199 Modbus registers. We can display up to 160. So you have up to 160 display variables that we can show in the Consolidator. It's a really great question. Someone also asked if I can provide details on Precision Digital's technical support and field service options for on-site or remote commissioning and troubleshooting. So that's a loaded question with a bit of a loaded answer. So there's nothing official on paper. We don't typically send folks out to do any type of field or service work. We have a network of distributors that will help us out with that. We have a number of different integrators that know our products extremely well. But as far as over the phone, we have full-time tech support. I personally do tech support on this particular product, but we also have a full-time department that can also support this product. I can do it over the phone, and I can help with any type of wiring questions, configuration, or anything like that. So any which way we can help somebody out with supporting this device, we will. So hopefully that answers that question. Someone also asked if I have a comparison of the Consolidator Plus versus paperless recorders. I don't, but you're not the first person to ask, so I probably should. I don't have a comparison for the two, but what I can tell you right off the bat is unlike paperless chart recorders, the Consolidator Plus will not do any type of trend graphs, and it won't display historical data. Which is usually what people want those for, not all the time, but usually when I see them advertised, they have all sorts of trend lines and everything. So right off the bat, we don't do that. But if you have any more specific questions, feel free to reach out. All right, folks, I think that's all the questions that we got today. So if you have any more, please feel free to reach out. We'll go on to the exit slide here. So you have my email address, phone number, and if you need anything, please feel free to let me know. I really appreciate everyone coming today, and I hope you all have a great weekend.